thank you for braving the traffic and not attending the tech conference going on right now, and coming to see our 3 spring exhibitions. We're particularly excited about this show cycle. Unfortunately, Iska Greenfield Sanders could not be here today, but we're hoping to possibly have a closing reception for her work, which is on the ground floor as you come into the gallery. This year celebrates the 20th year of her working with the Berggruen Gallery, so we're excited to have that exhibition on. And then we're also excited to have 3 new artists exhibiting with the Berggruen Gallery. So thank you for joining us in this panel discussion. I want to say that this is a very open forum. I have some general questions that I'm going to throw out, but feel free, anyone in the audience, to jump in, interject if you have your own questions. We'd love to hear from you too. But I'll briefly get started with quick bios on each of the artists. Val Britton is here next to me. This is her show on the upper floor. Val was born in New Jersey, and she attended the Rhode Island School of Art and Design. She lived in Brooklyn after college, and then she moved to the Bay Area to go to CCA for her MFA, and lived in the Bay Area for 15 years. So we do have some rooted San Franciscans represented up here. Sadly, we lost her to Portland, but she's still very much a West Coast transplant artist. Val's work is in the collections of the Arkansas Museum of Fine Arts, the Cleveland Clinic, the De Sanchez Museum at Santa Clara, the Facebook headquarters, Achenbach's Foundation at the Fine Arts Museum here in San Francisco, the print collection at the Library of Congress, the National September 11th Memorial and Museum, the New York Public Library, the San Jose Museum locally, and the U.S. Department of State in Belgium. Looking forward to hearing more from Val. Then in the middle here we have Vanessa Marsh, who is very much a West Coaster. She was born in Seattle. She did her undergrad at Western Washington University. She also has a MFA from CCA and lived in the Bay Area from 20 years before we lost her also to Portland. So there's a little bit of a theme here. Vanessa is in the museum collections of the San Jose Museum of Art, as well as Val. The San Francisco Arts Commission, she has several pieces in the United Terminal number 2 at Gate 72. Make note of that. So next time you're flying in and out of SFO, you can go visit her work. And she's also in the collection of the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts. And last but not least, Joni Sternbach is joining us. Joni is a New York-based artist like Iska Greenfield Sanders, so we have both coasts represented in the shows. She also spends quite a bit of time in Santa Barbara, which is where most of the photographs downstairs in the Western Wave exhibition were taken, and I'm hoping she can tell us a bit more about that. She has a BFA in photography from the School of Visual Arts and an MA from New York University and International Center of Photography, where she taught for over a decade. She's in the museum collections of LACMA, the High Museum of Art in Atlanta, the National Portrait Gallery in London, the Joslin Museum, MoCA Jacksonville, the Nelson Atkins Museum, and the Museum of Fine Arts in Houston. So I guess my first question for all of you is, one kind of loose theme in all 3 exhibitions is landscape. And so just broadly, I'm curious how landscape plays into influencing your work, from kind of broadly, and I think in Val's work, you see references to the landscape, but then in Vanessa and Joni's work, it's much more literal. And so I'm curious how landscape plays into your work, and also issues like climate change, coastal erosion. Are any of those kind of factors in your work? So I'll just open it to any of you that want to answer.
Yeah. Can you all hear me well? I'm infamous low talker. It's a great question, and I feel like, spending time with these other shows, I can see a lot of common threads, even though the work is visually very different. But I think there's something to the way we're working with materials with our hands, and there's a human touch of craft to the material that maybe like speaks to, you know, the fragility of this moment, and how we're kind of referencing landscape in specific places, but through our own hand and lens. I mean, for me, I really came to landscape, I mean, I consider these like imaginary landscapes or like amalgamation of different views. And I really came to that through an interest in mapping and like tracing routes and pulling out like symbols and lines, and more kind of veering into more of like an abstraction and an invented world. But I don't know, I think a lot about place and about like the way that we are so global, move through places, the way that like we kind of, places change us, you know, and we imprint on places. And again, I get very thinking about like material, and like I paint a lot with like different minerals and like collisions of minerals and that are of the earth, and it is the earth, and I use water as a painting medium that flows, and so it kind of like creates an actual landscape of flow. So it's kind of abstract, but there's like so many threads. So I could go on, but I'm gonna pass it to you.
Well, I also think a lot about the fragility of the moment, and especially with the lumen prints, I was interested in, I've lived on the West Coast my whole life, and taking these landscapes that felt incredibly solid and that we think of as permanent, and representing them in a way that was really like ethereal and light and transparent and airy, to highlight the effect that we have on the landscape, like that despite feeling like these landscapes are so grandiose and essentially feeling like we can take from those landscapes like whatever we want without effect, in reality, like it's all part of this like very fragile system. So that's what I was thinking about with the lumens. And then with the Further to Fly series, and with previous series before that, because I've lived sort of all over the West Coast my whole life and moved around quite a bit, I feel like the West Coast is my home rather than like a specific place on the West Coast being my home. And so I've had a practice in this series and others of taking lots of reference shots and then combining those reference shots into like new, almost imagined spaces, but spaces that really represent the West Coast, despite being like amalgamations of different places. So that's like another way that our work relates to each other, is this like imagined space that still has like a rooting in reality. Yeah, so that's what I think of.
Well, let's see. My work began by paying close attention to the ocean. And for me, it was this emotional landscape that brought me to it over and over again. And eventually, I came into contact with people, surfers in the ocean. And through this conflation of time and effort, my work slowly changed to be more people-based. But then it surfing drew me to California, as it does many surfers, I suppose. And, and you know, once I started to meet people and photograph on ranches and see the connection between the ranch, the ocean, the environment, and how we all interact in it, it just became this fascination for me that, you know, I dealt with one in a way that was like fantasy, you know, this kind of Eastern girl fantasy about what the West was. And making pictures with wet plate clothing is very much in the moment. You can plan out all you want, you can stage whatever you want, but by the time your plate is sensitized and then put in the back of your camera and you're finally ready to take the picture, your picture may have changed. So there's a lot of, you know, accepting what comes your way and being in the moment. That is a little bit like surfing, and not so much maybe like being an artist, where if you're in your studio, many things are just right there for you. So the landscape. Did I cover it?
You did, and
Sorry, I just kind of went off on some tangent.
yeah, and Joni, while you have the microphone, I'd love for you to tell us a little bit. So Joni's work in Western Wave in this exhibition focuses on these surfers that are mostly in Santa Barbara, and I would love for you to tell everyone just a little bit more about the collodion process, because I have this kind of fantasy of walking up and seeing you on the beach, like under this, hood, and I mean, you're traveling places, and this equipment is very large. So if you can kind of just,
Sure.
give us a visual of what we would come across. And then I'm also curious about your relationship to the subjects. Like, do you know these people? Do you reach out to them? Like, how do you engage with your subjects?
Okay. So the process is from the 19th century. It's the process you think more about when you see Civil War photography than when you see surf photography. It's called wet plate collodion, and it involves the coating of your plate on location, the sensitizing of that plate. So these actual plates were made one at a time, coated with gun cotton and ether and bromides and iodides, all of this stuff that you probably don't need to know about. And you pour it on the plate, and then you sensitize it in a bath of silver nitrate. And then while it's wet, you put it in the back of the camera. You run out, you pray the horse doesn't move, you talk to your people, you hope your exposure is fast enough, it's not, and there's a lot of movement. I mean, there's a lot, it's basically insanity. And then you, because you want to sort of live in the spirit of the 19th century, photographers before you want to make multi-panel plates, because that's what they did. And this way you're making this bigger object, and it's a way to increase your vision on the beach or on the ranch, and also increase your image size. So those are two 11 by 14 plates made with an 11 by 14 camera. So that actual plate was in the back of the camera, and it's a direct positive on black and metal. That's what it's a tin type.
Right? Two separate exposures.
Yeah, they're all on metal. Yeah,
And they're unique pieces.
right, and they're made it takes about 15 minutes, start to finish, to do one piece. So if you're doing a diptych, you have to hope the light doesn't change. You have to hope your development is exactly the same, so that things are matching left to right or right to left.
And do you wear a hood?
Oh, my camera has a big hood. It's got an elastic, a piece of elastic that goes over the camera, and it stays on the camera, and I go in and out. And so, yeah, it's a funny little thing, but anybody with a large format camera has a hood.
And how have you gotten to know these surfers?
So the first surfer I met was by chance, and then when I went to the surfing beach, I just went and photographed whoever was there. And one of the downsides of wet plate collodion is that you've got a lot of equipment, a lot of water you have to bring with you, because everything has to stay wet. And so when you go to one place, you're kind of stuck in that place. So if you're photographing a tree, you've got one picture, but if you're photographing everything around you and people that are coming and going, and you're in the middle of this total scene, you're basically a performance photographer. People are watching you, everything that you do, because everything, my darkroom comes with me, everything's done in the field, except for the varnishing. So these people I met a guy through Facebook, I'm sure you've heard it before. He invited me to a ranch. He said, this is the oldest cattle ranch in Santa Barbara. I can't tell you the location. I'm going to send you a pin, be there at 10 a.m., and just wait at the gate. So I get to the gate, and it's like, I'm calling him, nothing's happening. And then finally, 20 minutes later, he shows up, and the gate opens. We go in. It's like, wait here. Then I waited another hour. And then this woman came down. I believe she's the woman on the horse right there, Stacy. And she is the person who is running the ranch. And she then took us around on an ATV to show us all the different locations of where I could possibly shoot. And we just started making pictures. It was a very magical thing. I was terrified the horse was going to, careen into the camera, careen into the dark tent, the whole thing. But everything worked out really well, and I developed a friendship with them, and we photographed on the beach. We photographed in a variety of locations, and yeah, she's moved to San Luis Obispo now, I was told yesterday. A second to a half a second. Yeah, but long enough to get a blurry picture.
I love Joni. I mean, the thing that I notice in all of your works is that the sitters, they look like they're so comfortable with you, and that's part of why I was curious if, like, do you know these people? And I can imagine just, sitting with them and them observing your process and the effort and energy that goes into it.
Yes.
There's a mutual respect between the two of you.
Yeah, and we just developed a lot of warmth. We have very different political views, we discovered, and I just thought if people can come together to make pictures, we can all be at peace with the world. So I don't know if that's going to be true, but it's a hope.
Yeah. Well, Joni's talked to us a little. Oh, Byron, do you?
Vanessa?
Yes.
As the process is it, I'm going to expose my ignorance perhaps. I'm used to it. Tintype? Is the same?
Yeah, so we're using the same process but in a different way. So I create my images actually in the darkroom, which isn't traditionally how you use wet plate collodion. So I do like drawings on Mylar, and so because you're creating a direct positive image, I can lay a drawing in black ink on top of the wet plate, and I have the wet plate sort of like nestled in a tray, so it's like just below where the drawing is, so the drawing's not touching the plate. And so I'll put, in this case, 3 different drawings on top of the plate, and then do 3 exposures as I remove drawings. And so that's how you get the depth in the image. Yeah, so, but it's the same.
What's with the palm trees?
Yeah, what's with the surfers? Well, I think 2 things. I mean, one of the things Joni and I talked about in terms of connections between our work is this sort of myth of California. And I heard a great quote recently that was like, California started as a myth. Like if you think back in the history of California, it was like there's been so much mythology around this place, like since it first began. And so I think we're both like playing off that idea with our images. On a sadder note, my dad unfortunately was terminally ill in Palm Springs. And so part of my coping mechanism while he was in the hospital was to walk around Palm Springs and took just like hundreds and hundreds of reference shots. And so the tintype process, the wet plate collodion process, historically was used sometimes to create memento mori, like images of people who recently passed away. And so that's why I chose the process. So I decided to use these reference shots to create the drawings, and then I used the wet plate collodion process as a sort of like memento mori to my father, but then also to like the evolving California landscape and just sort of like the, climate change and things. And a place like Palm Springs, I personally am just like very aware of that, like this space of leisure that's like backed up against this very dry, arid desert that is like becoming drier because of this leisure that's happening like within it. And so, yeah, so hence the palm trees.
And Vanessa, because we have Paul Simon coming to San Francisco in July, can you tell us about the title of the series?
Oh my gosh, I didn't know that. I might have to come. I mean, that's maybe my next trip. Yeah, when I was in 7th grade, my dad took me on a trip to the San Juan Islands, and it was the year that Paul Simon's Rhythm of the Saints album came out, and we were listening to this album on a tape cassette player in the car, and that was his favorite song on the album, was Further to Fly. And then the actual lyrics of the song are about sort of going through life and the idea that there's always like further to fly, until there isn't, but yeah, always like a new place to go to, a new journey to take.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And Val, I don't mean to put you on the spot, and I hope this isn't too personal, but you've also, talked about your father's passing as a big inspiration for your work. So can you elaborate a little bit on that as well?
Yeah, of course. And yeah, I just want to say too, there's so many, like listening to Joni talk, there's so many like threads of commonality. Like I feel like we all kind of use different processes that have this degree of like risk or chance. And that's kind of part of, I think, the discovery in the image and what makes it unique, and like the kind of performance of it. I use printmaking and also this fluid way of painting that I can't really control, to kind of try to lead me to a new place and like respond to that. But yeah, my dad was a truck driver when I was growing up. I grew up in New Jersey, and he, in the 70s and 80s, drove cross country. He would drive I-80 from Totowa, New Jersey, where I grew up, to Oakland, California. And he passed away when I was a teenager. And there was just like a lot that was kind of like left unknown about his, growing up. And he was, had kind of like, not an easy time, and becoming, a mechanic and working at a gas station and stuff was like his way to like sustain himself. And then there was, this adventure in like being able to go across the country. And so after he passed, and, I was working in printmaking in undergrad and doing all this layering and kind of looking through family photos and I actually have a series of photos that he had taken out the cab window in like the 70s, those like square ones, and that were just like, you see the rear view mirror and just like landscapes, and didn't know what they were, just kind of put them together. And so that kind of started this like sort of trying to like weave my story with his story to know him, in this kind of crude way. And I lived in New York after RISD for a few years. I wanted to go to grad school. And I think, again, connecting to this like myth of the West, my dad used to love going to like the Fisherman's Wharf and, in the typical tourist way. And he found like peace out there. And so, yeah, I definitely wanted to come back to the West Coast. And so for grad school, my husband and I took a road trip across the country. And it was, at the dawn of the cell phone, not to age myself. So we used a paper atlas and took 2 weeks and just found like campsites along the way. And, I grew up in New Jersey in a small town, and I'd been to California, but I didn't like know much else. And so seeing the middle of the country was this really profound experience for me of like connection and thinking about, and I feel like that's a core theme of my work, is like thinking about what is home and how are we connected and where are we going, and like working with mapping as like a metaphorical exercise too, or thinking about like not just mapping a place, but mapping your time, charting time, like accumulating time, building things, and like accretion, and also loss, like what is cut away or what is not seen. Or in a map, there's information that is shown and there's very much that is not shown, and those are decisions about like what is important, what is remembered. So I'm like on the tangent, but like it was kind of like a way to connect to my dad by projecting sections of I-80 onto this large paper. And it was also like a technical exercise in wanting to open up my drawing hand and make some things that were bigger. Actually, I have a friend here from grad school who knows all of this, so we were doing this together. And and I just started kind of like abstracting and layering and using those symbols, and as a printmaker, drawing into it, painting, cutting, layering, ripping, in all these different ways, and also realizing that like I wasn't just trying to recreate his map or weave myself in, but I was also kind of like finding my own way and creating some sort of a record of the time, or maybe like through abstraction trying to create like a feeling of movement or an emotional experience. It's like kind of crazy that we have all of those connections. But I think a lot about the way we're kind of like also talking about fragility, about like the kind of fragility of life, and also like kind of maybe capturing a moment through the work that is, an impression of a time that is always changing, like as our landscape is changing and times are changing. And I think now too about like with our phones, we never really like look at the big expanse of the map anymore and find ourselves in it. Like the dot, just like we are the dot, and we are always like just focusing on the dot and not like the bigger landscape we're part of.
Thank Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. And I think everyone has kind of touched on this, but another kind of theme in all of your work is the material process. And each of you have a very kind of specific and labor-intensive process. Vanessa, I would love for you to talk a little bit about the Lumen series and kind of how you're creating those. And Val, you mentioned your printmaking background, but I encourage everyone to kind of get up close to these and see how many layers are within them. We could also do a scavenger hunt. One of them has a postage stamp in it, so I challenge you all to find it. In the back of the big work there, there's some textures that look like leather, and you were saying it's the back of wallpaper. And Val has been a resident at Recology and kind of the equivalent in Portland. So I'd love for you to talk about that as well. So.
Okay, me first. Okay. Well, the Lumen process, for those who aren't familiar with the process, it's using traditional darkroom paper like silver gelatin, black and white darkroom paper, and exposing it to sunlight or to UV light. I expose it exclusively to sunlight because I feel like the images are about sunlight and about atmosphere, and so I really am trying to capture that in the image. And so it's important to me to I consider, it sounds cheesy, but I kind of consider the sun to be my collaborator in the process because the intensity of the light and where I am on the planet, even altitude, the time of year, completely changes what the exposure is. And so I have to be it's a very intuitive process in that I have to be aware of that. And for example, Melanie and I spent some time in Mexico about a year ago, and the UV index would be 13 on some days. Your skin just burns, when your mind does at least. And those images are different than any images I've made before. They had different anomalies in the way the sunlight hit the paper that I hadn't seen before. I'm going a little off track, but I start by tracing different actual mountain ranges on the West Coast. Well, the western United States, really, not just the West Coast, because some are the Rockies and the Tetons. Usually referencing places I've been in my life at some point. And then I cut out these paper masks of those mountain ranges. And then I always do tons of exposures. So I do multiple exposures, each one with a different paper mask on it. And then I do dodging and burning to create different effects within the sky and how the sunlight is showing itself in the image.
How do you slow down with it? I mean, that photographic paper is very, very light sensitive, so you've got to slow that process down. What do you do?
Well, it reacts really differently to
She lives in
the
Portland.
UV light. Yeah. I live in
I
Portland.
said she lives in Portland.
Well, it's actually true in that, trying to make lumens in the middle of winter in Portland is almost pointless. It barely affects I have to leave them out for hours, and it just gets
Is it printing out paper then?
No, it's just, no, it's okay. No, it just, the UV light affects it differently, and so I don't develop it. I only put it in fix. So it's a little. I think it has to do with the elements, the chemicals in the paper that give it the different grades. So the multi-grade paper, I get way more different tones in the multi-grade paper than I do in graded paper, I've noticed. Oh, thank you. And so, it's not, I might be wrong on this, but I'm pretty sure I'm actually washing all the silver out of it because I'm not developing it at all. So I think the silver gets completely washed out, and what we're left with is the UV reaction with the other chemicals in the paper. Yeah.
And I'll point out that this is the Lumen series too that Vanessa's just speaking about, and similar to the collodion process, these are all unique pieces. So it's that fleeting moment, and we're also used to digital photography and being able to capture bursts and 10 images and picking the best. But these are
right. And in both cases, I can't see what it's going to look like. I can't see what the finished product is going to look like until I've processed it. And so, there isn't, it's not like your digital camera at all.
And so, Val, I kind of primed you for a question, so I'll let you answer.
Oh, wait, so you wanted to talk about
Just the
printmaking
material
and
process and about Recology and
Yeah.
the residents that you did and just the layering of them.
Yeah. I mean, I think I mentioned, like, I studied printmaking as an undergrad, but I became more interested in, like, the unique mark of the printing process than in printing multiples of something. And also the title of the show, Ghost Coast, is also partly talking about ghost prints, like the second printing and the fainter kind of shadow printing of the print. So Recology, when I lived here in San Francisco, I did the Recology residency, which many of you might know is the artist in residence program that the waste disposal company, Recology, runs. It's a really unique and incredible program. I think I did it in 2010 or 2011, but they invite artists. You're there for, I think, 3 months. You create a body of work strictly out of material that you've like scavenged from the PDRA, the public disposal reuse area. So it's not exactly like the dirty diaper trash dump. It's more like that place you go to drop off things that are too big for trash collection. And so you kind of run around grabbing things before they get, bulldozed. And it's amazing because it really is kind of puts a wrench in things, but opens up all these paths artistically because it forces you to be really open to what you're going to find. You can't like predict that or manifest things. And so for me, it's like I definitely have a language, but all these materials kind of filtered in, I deconstructed and reconstructed. And actually, I have materials I've kept for, since then. And then, like Melanie mentioned, I did the sister program in Portland, which is called Glean. And that was started a decade ago by the Recology folks here who are starting programs in other cities. And I did that maybe almost 2 years ago in Portland. So anyway, I think like as an exercise in like having to work with parameters and limitations of what you find, but also being asked to like use new things and see what happens, that I also find this resonance in like the histories of the objects and how you're weaving in all of these places and pasts into the work. And again, also as like a environmental act or as like a citizen of trying to not consume so much and take things out of the waste stream. And then the last thing I'll say too is I think it really speaks to like value and care, which is something I'm thinking a lot about in this new work, is about kind of like showing care to things that maybe are overlooked, and kind of questioning what is value or what can be kind of like woven in, and taking, just the care it takes to assemble all these detailed parts, like Melanie was mentioning, like looking at all the details. So there's a lot woven in that is reclaimed and recycled. Yeah.
Can I just ask you to
Sure.
mention some of the specific materials that you found and worked with there?
Yeah, so I mean, I think in Recology they said like, well, it should be 95%, you could maybe if you really need something from the hardware store, but like, it's such a great challenge to go like 100%, So I got really into it and it's like, it's amazing what people throw away. Like we have too much, so people throw away new things as well as old things. So some of the things I found were like paper, like newspapers that were like 100 years old. I mean, I do have some wallpaper in here that's very old. I used HVAC like metal tape. I used all kinds of stationery and folders. I ground up paper and made paper in a blender and made paper in window screens that I dried. I found printer cartridges and painted with those inks. I have a lot of those still that I paint with. So many things, mail, plastic, sheeting. I feel like anything can be kind of deconstructed. Window shades. I'm sure I'm forgetting a lot of things, but yeah.
Are there other questions from the audience?
It's just interesting looking at, using this photographic process from the 19th century in the 21st century. And it just made me think about, I have this antique chair, and however I ended up with, that's a whole other story, but I have no understanding of where it came from or whatever, and it needed a repair, and I brought it to this guy to get repaired, and he was trying to date it for me, and he said, well, based on it's all made with hand tools and this and that, so I can say that it's probably from this time. He said, but, it could have been made much later because, so I just find that, interesting thinking about, how, you know, artwork is dated from the past. Usually they sometimes look at the materials and look at the process, or, you know, and so I guess, you know, is there awareness? I'm sure there is, thinking about like, well, 1,000 years from now, you know, that, you know, if, you know, or whatever, like, when like they compress our civilization, like, oh, these 300 years is all pretty much the same thing. This is what happened. These, you know, and so, yeah, just like, I'm just curious. Do you think about how you're, and actually this question is for all of you in a way, like, how do you imagine your work to be perceived far into the future, and like, what kind of message are you maybe leaving there for people like far beyond this context? Like, how, you know, what kind of message do you hope people maybe might see in your work far into the future? Not. Anyway,
Wow, so this is Antiques Roadshow plus.
Sorry, that was a long.
No, it's good. It's good. You know, you touched on something that I didn't get to say, and part of the reason I'm really drawn to 19th century photography is because, well, I love handmade things, but I love this reference point and the conversation that I get to have with history by making these pictures with an old process, but with a contemporary twist. That's kind of the best way to put it. You know, I don't know if surfers and cowboys, you know, ever got together on the ranch and then went down for a surf. I'm hoping they did, but it's you know, the idea is the fantasy of this possibility and just kind of having this conversation, you know, even if it's only in my head. But I like when photography can talk about something that's happening right now, but also reference its origins. So that's for me.
Talking to the past as well.
Say it again?
You're communicating with the past as well as the present.
Right, right.
Yeah, which makes me think of like one of my favorite quotes, which is a Werner Herzog quote from Cave of Forgotten Dreams. And he's talking about, which I find to be a fascinating film because it's essentially about like the origin of this artistic urge, like the first, or not one of the first records we have of humans wanting to leave this mark that people, you know, 30,000 years later are looking at and considering and thinking about, you know, what that meant to those people that made that mark, which I think is amazing. But he said, the line is that we are locked in history and they were not. So like they made this mark without this historical context, and like everything we do is within that context. Like we can't get away from it. There's no way to make work outside of the context for us.
Now we just worry about the future, not the past.
Yeah. And I guess, I mean, on the other note, to answer your question, I think I would hope that my work, well, I mean, to be the most optimistic, that my work speaks to like this moment in history, and like hopefully a moment, I mean, hopefully people are looking at my artwork 1,000 years from now and we're still here on the planet, right? I mean, yeah. So, I mean, to be optimistic that it represents that moment, you know, this moment of hopefully a turning point to greater respect for the earth and for our resources and everything. So that's what I would hope.
No, I mean, that's a great question, because when thinking about memento mori and like you know, these processes are so colored by that history, but that's a layer you're using to give meaning and also like some contrast to these, you know, you think about memento mori and you think about the dark, you know, how dark and somber things can be, and then these landscapes of California, and like, yeah, there's so much layered meaning. And I mean, for me, I think about like the history of printmaking and also like abstraction and like how do you know, like everything's been done, but like why, if we can just take a photograph, or if there's an easier way to do things, like why paint or why do this, right? There has to be for other reasons. And I feel like, again, I'm really committed to handmade things and touch and texture and like the physicality. And especially during the pandemic, I was like starved for like encounter. It's so cheesy, but I wanted to just like see layered materials in real life, you know? And like, I just think like there's a humanness that we need to see materials joined together. And yeah, like with printmaking, there is such a history of like reproduction, but you know, I'm kind of like using those tools to try to, again, make something that is of this moment, and using that history of abstraction to talk about movement. And yeah, I feel like in my work, there's like kind of a 50-50 of like, you know, this like chance and intuition and like playing with like color theory and relationships and space and like puzzle pieces and fooling around with like half the time, you know, the conceptual part or these references. So I don't know, I think it's like a question I'm constantly asking myself too, is like, why? What am I doing here? And like, I wanna surprise myself. Like I obviously have like, you know, methods and like systems that I like to use, but then I also like to kind of like do something dramatic and risky and maybe like ruin it, but like see where it goes so I can like amuse myself and like surprise myself. Yeah, but I feel like I don't know. I don't have a lot more to say about art history, but it's like, yeah, it's there.
Joni, just going back to your relationship to your subjects, I'd love to know if you have a favorite subject or if there's an interesting story in you know, some of the pieces downstairs, or if there's any characters in there.
There's definitely characters, but can you hear? Sorry. That's okay. I don't know if you can hear better this way. Well, downstairs you'll see a photograph of a mermaid and her merman, and that was taken in Australia. And when I got to Byron Bay in Australia, and I realized I could photograph with wet plate, my host said to me, "So who do you want to photograph?" Like, you know, I'm supposed to know all the surfers there. And I said, "Well, who's here?" And they said, "Well, there's a mermaid." I said, "Bring her." And this is this woman who teaches little children how to swim like mermaids. They have their little fins, and she's like developed it as this, you know, way to earn a living. And she was just phenomenal. She came. They said, you know, they have to carry her. Once she puts her fins on, she can't walk. So they carry her to the beach. And then she came, and I met her, and her hair was all curled, and she had on all this makeup, and I was like in shock because I wasn't expecting that. But she was, you know, she does photo shoots, so she knew what to do. But it's like, I said, you know, that's great, but if we're going to do it again, maybe you could forget about all that. So she came the next time with her merman, and they formed a pose downstairs. You'll see it. It's just, to me, it's like, it's this incredible thing. She's an incredible surfer, a lovely person, and just kind of a crazy story. Yeah. Thank you.
How do you surf with a mermaid?
You don't surf with it, you swim with it. Yeah.
Good question.
Yeah, water woman is the thought. Did you have a question?
Yeah, for all of you, how did you all get started as artists?
Oh, wow.
Well, you got to start somewhere.
High school for me, drawing and trying to learn how to paint and going to art school, and then being forced to take a photography class. Here I am. That's how
I fell in love with photography.
I did. I love looking through a lens. I mean, I just love the way you see when you look through all these different lenses and all these different formats. It's just another world that is very important to me. Yeah.
I was fortunate to have a very creative mother, and so she was a graphic designer, but she also was a skilled painter, and so I always had sort of art supplies around as a kid. But then it wasn't until she gave me, like she had a stenciling business, what would now be called decorative painting. I would go into people's houses and back in the 80s and do stencil designs along the, you know. And so I actually think my work is really influenced by that, because it's graphic design and stenciling is all about layering of things, which is a lot of what I do. Yeah, yeah, very much. Yeah, yeah. But she gave me her camera that she used to document her projects. She gave me her camera in middle school, and so then that was, the rest is history as far as then I became obsessed with light-sensitive materials. So. Which I think was partially because she didn't work in that medium at all, so it was sort of a way to, you know, find my own creative voice. And my physics and light and all of that comes into play, which is great too.
Wow, that's really cool. Yeah, I made my first like large-scale temporary work with my mom's makeup bag on her wall when I was a few years old. I was thrilled with it. She was not. And yeah, it's cheesy, but I was like 5 years old, and I was like, that's what I'm doing. and it never really changed. And I was really fortunate to have really supportive parents and a great high school art teacher who was just like incredible. And actually, he was the person who even like told me that what art school was. This was like a thing you can do. And living in New Jersey, you know, we went to like the Pratt Portfolio Day and all of that stuff. And so I feel like just having teachers like nurture that and tell you that like it's possible was everything, you know? Yeah.
Are there any other questions from the audience?
I have a question. Your Joni and Vanessa's are one at a time. Yours could be one at a time. Are they multiple at a time as you work through? They have similarities, but they're different.
No, they're unique works, and
Do you work till one and then finish it?
oh no, I work on like 30 things at a time. Yeah, I'm like a grazer, and you know, and I love the opportunity to have like, you know, these sort of groupings of series, because with smaller work, I love to work in series because I feel like things sort of talk to each other, or like ideas kind of move through or contrast. So they're all unique, but they are like kind of part of like a related family.
And the lumens I usually make a bunch at once. I'm working, because I'm like...
Before you go to the chemical?
Well, the lumens, so
Yeah.
the mountains, I like do all the exposures and then they get fixed. So I'll like set one out and then prepare another one and set that one out and then change the mask. And then I collect, I'll collect usually, I think I have screens to develop like 18 images. So I collect 18 images and then go and process them.
With the use of trash bags, is that your?
There might be some trash bags involved. Some black trash bags, yes.
Well, I just want to thank everyone. Thank